They didn't storm the gates. They quietly rewrote the rules in broad daylight, packing courts, muzzling media, and shredding checks and balances before you even noticed. Blink, and it's over. What's their next move? And is your vote already powerless? In How Democracies Die, by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, you'll discover that the way democracies perish has changed. Are you concerned about the stability of democratic systems, perhaps even in your own country? It's a common anxiety today, as we witness political norms being challenged and divisions deepening. Ignoring these subtle shifts can be perilous, as democracies are often dismantled not with a bang, but with a whimper, through a series of seemingly small, often legal, steps taken by elected leaders. This book offers a crucial understanding of this modern threat, revealing how leaders with authoritarian tendencies can subvert the very systems that brought them to power. It provides a framework to recognize these warning signs and to appreciate the vital, often unwritten, rules that truly underpin a healthy democracy. By understanding these dynamics, you can become more adept at identifying threats and more empowered to defend the democratic principles you value. The first key insight is that democracies today rarely die through violent military coups, as they often did during the Cold War. Instead, they are more frequently subverted from within by elected leaders, presidents, or prime ministers who erode democratic institutions gradually and often legally. Think of Hugo Chávez in Venezuela. He was democratically elected, promising to empower the people. He then used democratic processes, like referendums and elections, to rewrite the Constitution, pack the courts with loyalists, and harass the opposition and media. Each step might have appeared minor, or even justifiable at the time. But cumulatively, they dismantled Venezuelan democracy over nearly 2 decades. This slow erosion is deceptive because there's no single moment of crisis that sets off society's alarm bells, making it harder to recognize and resist until it's too late. Next, consider how you can identify potentially authoritarian leaders before they gain full control. The book proposes a litmus test based on 4 key behavioral warning signs. First, do they reject, in words or action, the democratic rules of the game? This could mean expressing a willingness to violate the Constitution or ignore election results. Second, do they deny the legitimacy of their political opponents, casting them as criminals, subversives, or existential threats? Third, do they tolerate or encourage violence, either by their supporters or by failing to condemn it? And fourth, do they show a readiness to curtail the civil liberties of opponents, including the media, perhaps by threatening lawsuits or new restrictive laws? A politician ticking even one of these boxes is a cause for serious concern. Another crucial aspect is understanding the historical role of political parties as gatekeepers. For much of American history, established parties, both Republican and Democratic, worked to keep extremist demagogues off mainstream tickets and away from power. Figures like Henry Ford, with his anti-Semitic views, or Huey Long, with his dictatorial tendencies, despite some popular appeal, were largely contained by party insiders who valued electability and stability. However, the book argues that these gatekeeping mechanisms have weakened significantly in the United States, due to changes like the rise of primary elections, which give voters more say, but reduce party leader control, and a fractured media landscape which allows outsiders to bypass traditional channels. This weakening, the authors contend, was a key factor in Donald Trump's ability to capture a major party nomination and the presidency, despite exhibiting several authoritarian warning signs. Building on this, the authors emphasize that constitutions alone are not enough to protect democracy. Equally important are unwritten democratic norms, specifically mutual toleration and institutional forbearance. Mutual toleration is the understanding that your political rivals are legitimate, patriotic citizens who have an equal right to compete for power and govern, even if you vehemently disagree with their policies. You don't treat them as enemies. Institutional forbearance is the idea that politicians should exercise restraint in deploying their legal powers. For example, a president might technically have the power to issue a flood of executive orders, or a Senate majority might have the votes to block every single nominee from the opposing party's president. But forbearance means refraining from using these powers to their absolute limit to avoid grinding the system to a halt or permanently damaging trust. These norms act as the soft guardrails of democracy, preventing political competition from becoming a fight to the death. The book uses the analogy of a pickup basketball game, where unwritten rules about fouls and fair play keep the game going, even without official referees. So, how do elected authoritarians go about dismantling these guardrails and the institutions they protect? They typically follow a recognizable playbook. The first step is often to try and capture the referees, meaning the courts, law enforcement agencies, and intelligence services. This can be done by packing courts with loyalists, firing independent officials, or using these agencies to shield allies and harass opponents. Next, they work to sideline key players who could challenge them. This includes muzzling or co-opting the independent media, intimidating or buying off business leaders who might fund the opposition, and discrediting or even jailing rival politicians and critical civil society figures. Finally, they try to rewrite the rules of the game to lock in their advantage, such as changing electoral laws, gerrymandering districts, or amending the Constitution to weaken checks and balances or extend their own power. These actions are often portrayed as necessary reforms to improve efficiency or combat corruption, providing a veneer of legality. The authors argue that these vital democratic norms of mutual toleration and forbearance have been significantly eroding in the United States for decades, largely due to extreme partisan polarization. This isn't a new phenomenon that started with Donald Trump, but rather a process that accelerated with figures like Newt Gingrich in the 1990s, who advocated for a more combative politics as warfare style. As Republicans and Democrats have become more ideologically sorted and view each other with increasing fear and animosity, based not just on policy but on cultural and racial identity, the willingness to see opponents as legitimate and to exercise restraint has declined. Examples include the increasing use of the filibuster for obstruction, battles over judicial appointments culminating in the Merrick Garland episode, and government shutdowns. This pre-existing weakness in America's democratic guardrails created a fertile ground for a leader like Trump. Ultimately, saving democracy is not a passive endeavor. The book suggests that when democracy is under threat, citizens and responsible leaders must actively defend it. This involves more than just outrage. It requires strategic action. One crucial strategy is forming broad pro-democratic coalitions, even with groups or individuals whose policy views you might normally oppose. The goal is to unite around the defense of democratic rules and institutions. Furthermore, while robust opposition is necessary, it should generally operate within democratic norms and institutions, using courts, elections, and peaceful protests to resist authoritarian overreach. Fighting dirty or trying to beat authoritarians at their own game of norm-breaking can often backfire by further eroding the rules and providing justifications for repression. Finally, the book hints at the need to address the deeper underlying causes of polarization, such as profound economic inequality and racial divides, to rebuild a more resilient democratic culture. The main takeaway of this book is that the survival of democracy hinges not just on the strength of its formal constitution and laws, but critically on the unwritten norms of mutual toleration and institutional forbearance upheld by political actors and citizens. When these soft guardrails erode, especially in a climate of intense partisan polarization, democracies become dangerously vulnerable to elected leaders who can subvert the system from within, often through gradual, subtle, and seemingly legal means. Recognizing these patterns and understanding the vital role of these informal rules is the essential first step for anyone wishing to protect and reinvigorate democratic life.